Why would Angela Williams, the woman who built an empire without me, still have my name in her will? That was the only thought echoing in my head as I gripped the phone so tightly, my knuckles turned white. The lawyer's voice had been calm, professional, but her words sliced through the dullness of my small apartment like a blade. Angela Williams, my ex-wife, had passed away 3 days earlier, and somehow against every shred of logic I was listed among the beneficiaries. The question refused to leave me alone. Angela had walked away from me 15 years ago. She had left not just a marriage, but a life of simplicity, of quiet dinners, of birthday cakes baked in our cramped kitchen. She traded it all for high-rise boardrooms, investors with sharp smiles, and a son who mirrored her ambition more than my humility. What could possibly compel her to write my name on any legal paper? After all this time, Mrs. Parker's angry voice broke into my spinning thoughts. From the other side of our thin apartment wall, she was yelling again about her ruined flower beds, claiming my sprinklers had flooded them. Her words were muffled but sharp, dripping with blame. The banging on the wall made my coffee cup shake in its saucer. But I barely heard her. The lawyer's words had carved me out of that room and dropped me somewhere else entirely. A place where memories I had buried came rushing back with merciless clarity. I sat down heavily in the kitchen chair, the phone still warm against my ear, staring at the stained tiles beneath my feet. Angela, gone. The last time I had seen her was at David's college graduation, and even then her handshake had been more formal than affectionate. She hadn't looked at me as the man who once promised her forever. She had looked at me like an inconvenient relic, something she had already discarded. And yet now she had reached back through death itself and touched my life again. The lawyer, her name was Janet Morrison, had repeated the details patiently, as if speaking to a man hard of hearing. Friday, 2 o'clock, Riverside Memorial Chapel. The funeral service first. Then at 4:30, the reading of the will at her office downtown. My presence was not optional, she said. Angela had been explicit about that. Are you sure? I had whispered, though my throat felt like it was closing. Yes, Mr. Johnson. Your name is clearly written here. And so the question circled again, louder this time. Why me? The hours crawled by after that call, yet every tick of the clock only thickened the fog in my chest. I tried to distract myself with the chores of an ordinary day, washing the dishes, wiping the counters, folding the worn shirts from the laundry. But each task collapsed under the weight of that one thought. The woman who had risen like a storm through the world of business, the woman who had never once glanced back to see if I was keeping up, had in the end turned her gaze back to me. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, the patterns of streetlight shadows drifting across the cracked plaster. Memories refused to be silenced. Angela in her red coat, eyes flashing as she argued with a diner manager on the night we met. Angela laughing, head thrown back on the day I fumbled with the engagement ring. Angela in the hospital bed, exhausted but radiant, holding our newborn son. And then years later, Angela with her phone pressed to her ear, face hard and closed as she told me I was holding her back. The memories hurt, but they were all I had left. Now she was gone, and all that remained were echoes and a legal summons to attend her farewell. By Thursday, I had pressed my best suit, though it smelled faintly of mothballs from years in the back of my closet. I polished my shoes until they looked almost respectable, even though the leather was cracked. I stared at myself in the mirror, adjusting a tie I hadn't worn in half a decade. A man stared back at me, hair silver lines carved deep by time and disappointment. I wondered if Angela would even recognize this version of me. Friday morning arrived gray and cold. The Wyoming wind carried a bite that cut through my coat as I drove the 20 minutes to the chapel. My old Honda rattled against the polished procession of black SUVs and shining sedans lined up outside. It felt like I was sneaking into a world that had long ago locked its doors against me. As I stepped through the heavy wooden doors, whispers followed. I caught fragments. Is that Marcus? Her ex-husband. What is he doing here? The pews were filled with faces I half remembered from charity galas and business dinners, all polished, all belonging to Angela's world. None of them offered a smile. Every glance was a verdict, and every verdict found me guilty. I slid into a back pew, hoping to shrink into the shadows. My plan was simple. Sit quietly. Pay my respects. Leave before anyone could remind me I didn't belong. But fate had never cared much for my plans, because before the organ music could begin, before the minister could rise to welcome the mourners, I heard a voice I knew too well. Sharp, cold, merciless. "Why are you here?" David, my son, stood in the aisle staring at me as though I were a trespasser. His voice cut across the hushed chapel, drawing every pair of eyes toward us. He was 37 now, tall, commanding, dressed in a tailored black suit that probably cost more than my car. He looked so much like his mother it hurt. The air between us thickened as he stepped closer. "You lost the right to stand here the day you walked out of our lives," he said, loud enough for the entire congregation to hear. And just like that, the funeral became a battlefield. "Why are you here?" David did not shout, but every word cut through the chapel. Heads turned all at once. The air smelled of lilies and old wood. I rose halfway, unsure whether to answer or disappear. "To say goodbye," I said. "Angela and I shared a life. I will not make a scene." "You already have," he said, jaw tight. "Leave now." A uniformed usher moved down the aisle. A woman in a black hat whispered to her neighbor. The organist's hands froze above the keys. David stepped closer. "You show up at her funeral like a stranger. You do not belong here." "I belong to the promises we made," I said. "That is why I came." "Promises." His laugh was sharp. "You broke them when her success made you small." The usher reached my row. "Sir, maybe outside would be better." I looked at Angela's portrait near the altar. I looked at my son, whose eyes carried no softness. I stayed seated. Before the usher spoke again, a man in a navy suit came from the side aisle. His voice was calm, controlled. "Mr. Johnson must remain." "I am Richard Coleman, counsel to the estate. Mrs. Williams required his presence for matters following this service." Whispers rippled. The usher stepped back. David stared at Richard as if testing him. "Necessary," David repeated. "Since when does divorce give a man the right to intrude?" "It does not," Richard said. "But the will demands both of you. Let us respect the service." The minister cleared his throat. "Please be seated." David held my eyes, then turned sharply to the front pew. The organ resumed softer than before. I sat again, hands shaking. The eulogy painted Angela in gold. Visionary, tireless, a builder of opportunity. The crowd nodded in rhythm. I stared at the flowers until they blurred. Between the words, I heard other truths. Missed birthdays, silent dinners. But funerals choose their stories. Row by row, mourners filed past the portrait and urn. I stayed in place. My goodbye had been spoken to the dark 2 nights earlier, when I whispered her name into the emptiness of my room. At the front, David shook hands and accepted condolences like a host at a reception. A few people glanced at me, faces polite but cold. I kept my eyes on the hymn book. A woman paused at my row. "Mr. Johnson," she said softly, "I am sorry for your loss." She placed a tissue packet beside me and moved on. The kindness startled me. When the final prayer ended, the minister invited us to the reception hall. I waited until most had left, then stood. My knees ached. David blocked the row again. "You will not follow us," he said. Richard stepped in. "Mr. Johnson will accompany me to the reading of the will. Both of you are required." Required. David's voice was flat. Did she write what she required of a man who failed her? Richard's tone did not waver. She wrote a great deal. You will hear it. David leaned close. Leave before you ruin what is left of today. I kept my voice even. I will not disturb anyone. I will not take food or speak, but I am not leaving. For a moment his face flickered, not the polished executive, but the boy who once asked me to fix a flat tire. Then it was gone. He stepped back. In the reception hall, voices buzzed against the clink of cups. I chose a place near a window. A pair of investors discussed market trends as if they were prayers. I wondered if Angela ever wanted a quiet room with no numbers. But she had loved the storm. I had loved the harbor. Richard found me with a plate. Eat something, he said. I shook my head. My stomach was tied in knots. He lowered his voice. After this, we walked together to my office. If anyone speaks to you, say nothing. I will handle it. Am I in danger? I asked. No, he said. But you are a symbol in a room full of stories. Let me control the story for 1 hour. Across the room, David watched us. When I noticed, he turned away and smiled at a man with a lapel pin, the smile of someone who expects cameras. The minister gave a final blessing. People drifted toward the doors. Richard touched my arm. Time. We stepped outside. The sun cut through clouds and lit the steps. My old car sat between two black sedans like an afterthought. I smelled cut grass and flowers. David's voice reached me from behind. 4:30 downtown. Do not be late. I want every word recorded. He walked away, shoulders squared. Richard checked his watch. Let us go, he said. The next part will not be easier. I believed him. The walk to Richard Coleman's office felt longer than the 3 blocks it really was. The town moved around us in its ordinary rhythm, but my pulse was off-beat. David strode ahead, phone pressed to his ear, Shu already reporting to someone. His voice carried sharp edges. He spoke of obligations, of strategy, as if the funeral were just another business meeting. I followed in silence, each step heavier than the one before. Richard's office occupied the top floor of a restored brick building. Inside, polished wood and neat bookshelves gave the impression of order. He gestured toward 2 leather chairs in front of his desk. David claimed the one closest. I sat in the other, content to remain at the edge. Richard closed the door and placed a thick folder on the desk. He adjusted his glasses, his manner both formal and steady. Thank you both for coming. I know today is difficult. Let us proceed carefully. David leaned back, exuding confidence. He looked like a man preparing to collect what was his due. Richard opened the folder. This is the last will and testament of Angela Williams, executed last March, witnessed according to state law. He paused, then continued. Angela was of sound mind and memory. She reviewed these provisions in detail. David waved a hand. We can skip the disclaimers. Tell us what she left. Richard's tone did not change. I will read every word as written. He turned to the second page. To my beloved son, David Johnson. I leave the family home at 914 Hillcrest Avenue, along with all furnishings, artwork, and personal property contained therein. David smiled as though hearing confirmation of what he had long expected. The Hillcrest property was worth close to $1 million on its own. Additionally, Richard read, I bequeath to David Johnson the sum of $500,000 to be transferred from my primary investment account within 60 days of probate. $500,000 plus the house. David's smile widened, though I noticed his eyes flicker with calculation. He was already measuring it against the empire his mother had built. Richard continued, these bequests are contingent upon David's continued employment with Williams Consulting Solutions for a minimum of 2 years following the execution of this will, or until such time as the company is sold or dissolved. David sat up straighter. Conditions, he said, his voice sharp. What kind of conditions? Richard read without pause. Should David leave the company voluntarily within that period, the cash bequest shall revert to the estate and the property shall be transferred into trust for community programs designated by the board. This is absurd, David snapped. She would never tie strings to my inheritance. These are her words, Richard said evenly. Not mine. David's jaw worked as he processed the sentence. He turned to me with a sneer. Do you hear this? She questioned my loyalty when I gave her everything. I did not answer. The air in the office had grown tight, each word heavier than the last. David leaned forward toward Richard. What about the company? What about controlling shares, assets, everything that actually matters? Surely that is next. Richard set the page down carefully. We are not finished, but I must remind you this will contain multiple provisions. Each is deliberate. David tapped his fingers against the arm of his chair, impatience radiating from every movement. He looked like a man waiting for dessert after swallowing an appetizer he found insulting. I remained silent, though my heart thudded. It seemed impossible that Angela would have left me anything significant, yet Richard's earlier insistence on my presence suggested otherwise. David broke the silence. My mother worked for decades to build something enormous. She would never risk it by placing it in the wrong hands. We all know who is meant to lead it. Richard did not respond immediately. He removed his glasses, polished them slowly, then replaced them with care. Only then did he continue. The remainder of Angela Williams's estate, including her controlling interest in Williams Consulting Solutions, her investment portfolio and associated holdings, is addressed in subsequent provisions. Finally, David said, "Let us hear it." Richard looked down at the pages, then back up at us. His expression revealed nothing, but his voice carried weight. Before I proceed, understand that these were Angela's final wishes. They were reviewed multiple times. Her mind was clear. David crossed his arms. Of course it was. Read it. Richard took a breath. I will, but let us mark the record. You have received a property and a significant sum. These represent more than many families see in a lifetime. David's tone turned icy. Spare me the lecture. Tell me what comes next. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Dust drifted in the strip of afternoon light cutting across the desk. Richard turned another page, his eyes narrowing slightly as he prepared to deliver words that would not be welcome. The company, the rest of the fortune, whatever Angela had built beyond my understanding, it was all written in those lines waiting to be spoken. David shifted impatiently. His voice was tight. Get on with it. Richard nodded once. Very well. But you must both be ready. These provisions change the course of everything. My hands tightened on the arms of the chair. I had come here prepared for humiliation, not revelation. Still, a part of me braced. Whatever Angela had written was no accident, and soon the truth would land like a hammer between us. Richard's eyes moved from the page to me. His tone grew deliberate, almost ceremonial. To my former husband, Marcus Johnson, I bequeath the sum of $33.5 million to be transferred from my primary investment accounts and securities portfolio. The words did not register at first. 33 million. I thought I had misheard, that the air in the room had twisted his voice into nonsense, but the stillness confirmed it. David froze, then flushed red. What did you just say? Richard did not pause. Additionally, I transfer to Marcus Johnson, controlling interest in Williams Consulting Solutions, including all subsidiary companies' real estate holdings and business assets. This transfer includes 65% ownership of corporate entities and appointment as chairman of the board of directors. The chair beneath me felt unsteady. The room tilted. Angela, who had once called me an anchor, who had chosen boardrooms over birthdays, was now handing me everything she had built. "This is impossible," David shouted. He leapt to his feet so violently that his chair rolled back into the wall. His fists trembled. Richard remained calm. "These are Mrs. Williams's words executed under full legal authority." "No." David slammed his palm against the desk. "This is fraud. She would never." She despised him. He ruined her. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. My throat was too dry. I had not spoken to Angela in 15 years. The idea that she would leave me control of her empire was as unreal as touching the sun. Richard adjusted his glasses. "I can assure you she was of sound mind. She underwent a full competency evaluation precisely to prevent challenges such as this." David's voice cracked. "She must have been pressured, manipulated. Someone got to her." I forced my voice out. "I did not. I have had no contact with her." "Liar," David snapped. "You want us to believe she just gave you everything." His fury was so raw that for a moment I saw him not as an executive but as the boy whose eyes once begged for approval. My heart ached even as his anger sliced into me. Richard's voice was steady. "Your mother reviewed every clause. She was certain." David's laugh was bitter. Certain. Certain to betray her only son. He turned back to me, eyes burning. "You, a man with no business sense, a retired worker with nothing to show, now control her life's work." "Maybe I am not qualified," I said softly, "but I never asked for this." "Exactly," he hissed, "which proves it is fraud." Richard raised a hand. "Enough. I will not allow accusations without evidence." David pointed at me with shaking hands. "I want every document examined, every email, every medical record." "They exist," Richard replied, "and they confirm what I have said." The office fell into thick silence. The ticking clock seemed louder, the air heavier. Finally, David whispered, "Why? Why would she do this?" "I gave her everything she wanted. I became the son she could display like a trophy. And she leaves it all to a man who abandoned her." His pain was sharp, but behind it was truth I could not deny. I had left when I could no longer live in the shadow of her ambition. Our marriage had collapsed under weight neither of us knew how to carry. Richard cleared his throat. Mrs. Williams left an explanation. "A personal message," David spat. "She writes him love letters while cutting me out." "It addresses you as well," Richard said. "She insisted it be read after these provisions." David dropped into his chair, shaking his head in disbelief. I still could not breathe properly. The number, the company, the sheer responsibility, it was more than my mind could contain. Yet the ache in my chest was not about wealth. It was about Angela. Why had she chosen me, after everything, to carry her legacy? Richard gathered the pages neatly. "The will is clear. The remainder of her estate belongs to Marcus Johnson." The words landed again, this time heavier. Belongs, not loaned, not conditional, belongs. David whispered it too, as if the syllables burned. Belongs. He looked at me with pure hatred. "You stole my life." I shook my head. "I did nothing." "You existed," he said coldly. "That was enough." Richard opened a separate envelope, his expression careful. "Before either of you speak further, hear her words. They were written for this moment." David's jaw clenched. "Read them, then." Richard unfolded the letter. The handwriting was Angela's, curved and firm. He glanced at both of us, then began to read. "My dearest Marcus, if you are hearing this, it means I am gone. You are likely wondering why." The sound of her name in that script sent a shiver through me. Richard looked up briefly. "She wrote several pages. Her explanation will not be brief." David exhaled sharply, his body trembling with rage and something deeper, something like despair. I sat still, bracing myself. Whatever Angela had chosen to say, it would shape the rest of our lives. Richard held the letter as if it were fragile glass. His voice softened, yet every syllable carried. My dearest Marcus, if you are hearing this, it means my time on earth has ended. You are sitting in a room with Richard and David, and I imagine confusion and anger are already filling the air. Let me explain. I felt the floor vanish beneath me. Hearing her words again was like opening a door I thought had been locked forever. Richard read on. Marcus, you believe you do not deserve this inheritance. I know you. You are likely shaking your head right now, ready to argue. But hear me. You deserve every penny, and you deserve the responsibility that comes with it. I swallowed hard. My hands gripped the chair until my knuckles ached. I never stopped loving you, Marcus. Not during our fights. Not during the divorce. Not during the years we lived apart. I loved you even when I was furious with you. I was angry because you saw what I could not. You begged me to slow down, to remember that family mattered more than profit. You asked me to put down the phone, to show up at our son's games, to look at you instead of numbers on a screen. I refused, and I convinced myself that ambition was enough. It never was. The tears burned before I could stop them. For so long I had carried guilt that perhaps I had been the weak one, the man who failed to keep up. But in her words, I heard something else: regret. Richard lifted his eyes. She wrote extensively. Please continue, I whispered. He nodded and read on. Marcus, you were the steady one. You carried the quiet burdens. You fixed the leaks, paid the bills, made sure the lights stayed on. You carried the weight I refused to see. I told myself those things were small. I was wrong. They were the foundation, and I abandoned them. Her voice, even in ink, pierced me. I remembered the nights when she came home after midnight, her perfume mixed with exhaustion, and I was left at the kitchen table with untouched dinner. She continued. When I chose divorce, I thought I was freeing us both, but I was running from my own shame. You asked for balance. I chose glory. In the end, glory is hollow without love. My breath came uneven. Every word cracked something inside me and mended it at the same time. Richard's voice slowed as he reached the heart of the message. That is why I am leaving you what I built. Not as payment, not as apology, but because I know you will never use it for yourself. You will use it for others. I trust you, Marcus, more than I ever trusted anyone else. I trust your quiet integrity. I trust that you will see people instead of numbers. David shifted in his chair, but Richard read on. This is not a gift to burden you. It is a trust. I could have left it to David, but I know his path is not ready. He must find his own footing. You, Marcus, will know what to do. I closed my eyes. For years I had lived small content with silence, believing I had been judged and found lacking. Now her words poured light into those hollow spaces. Richard paused. There are several more paragraphs. Read them, I said. Please. He continued. Marcus, do not let doubt destroy you. Remember the man who made me laugh in that diner when no one else dared. Remember the father who taught David how to ride a bike, even when he crashed into the hedge. Remember the husband who held my hand on a September morning and promised forever. That man still lives in you. That is the man I am trusting now. My chest ached so fiercely, I thought I might break. She closed with these words. My love for you never ended, Marcus. I buried it under contracts and deals, but it never died. In death, I return it to you in the only way I can. Not flowers, not apologies, but trust. Do not waste it. Live in a way that honors what we once were and what we could have been. Goodbye, my dearest. Richard folded the letter slowly, letting the silence stretch. The office seemed to breathe with us, the walls heavy with what had been spoken. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. She loved me. After everything, she still loved me. David's eyes darted toward me, blazing with a mixture of fury and disbelief. But in that moment, his anger was distant. All I felt was the weight of Angela's words, a weight that pressed down yet lifted me at once. Richard placed the letter in front of me. This original copy is yours, Marcus. My hand trembled as I touched the paper. It was the last conversation I would ever have with the woman who shaped my life. And it was more than money. It was absolution. Richard adjusted his glasses, then turned the next page. His voice steadied. David, my beautiful boy. If you are hearing this, I am gone, and I imagine you are angry. Perhaps furious. You may think your father manipulated me. You may believe this decision is betrayal. But it is not. It is love. A different kind of love than you expected, but love all the same. David stiffened his jaw tight. He did not speak, but his hands gripped the arms of his chair until his knuckles whitened. Richard read on. David, from the day you were born, I wanted the world for you. I wanted every door open, every advantage yours. I thought if I worked harder, earned more, pushed further, I could build you a life without limits. And in many ways I did. You grew up with comforts I never dreamed of as a child. You traveled, you studied, you succeeded. But I see now what I failed to give you. David looked away, blinking fast. His chest rose and fell with uneven rhythm. Angela's words pressed forward. I failed to let you learn struggle. I failed to let you build from nothing. I gave you ladders but not ground to stand on. You have learned how to climb but not how to plant your feet. Without roots, ladders topple. That is why I cannot give you this fortune, not yet. A sound escaped David, part laugh, part sob. He shook his head as if trying to shake the words from his ears. Richard continued. What I have left you, a home and a sum of money, is not small. It is more than enough to live securely, but it is also incomplete. It will not carry you forever. That is by design. I want you to build the rest with your own strength. You must learn to value sweat, not just polish. You must discover who you are when wealth is not the answer to every question. David's voice finally broke. That is not fair. Richard did not stop. David, I know you are angry at your father. For years you believed he abandoned us. That was never true. He stayed until I pushed him away. I told myself he was small, but in truth he was steady. He gave us light when the world went dark. He offered love when I offered deadlines. He carried burdens I refused to see. David pressed his hands over his face. Angela's letter pressed harder. You judged him for not chasing ambition, but you never understood the dignity of his work. He kept families' warm, powered homes, ensured safety for strangers who never knew his name. That is service. That is strength. Do not despise it. Learn from it. I could not breathe evenly. Hearing her defend me after so many years filled me with something sharp and tender. Richard's voice steadied. David, forgiveness is the gift I could not give you in life. You must give it to yourself now. Forgive your father for being human. Forgive me for teaching you that achievement was everything. Forgive yourself for the anger that chained you to resentment. Without forgiveness, wealth will devour you. David lowered his hands. His face was wet, though his eyes still blazed with hurt. Richard read the final lines. I love you, my son. But love must guide, not indulge. You will one day inherit more when you are ready. For now, learn to live without the armor of endless money. Learn to serve. Learn to see people as people, not as steps on a ladder. When you do, you will be greater than any empire I could have left you. Goodbye, David. Richard folded the page carefully, letting the silence expand. The room was still. Outside, faint traffic hummed, but here time seemed to pause. David whispered, "She loved me less." "No," I said softly. "She loved you enough to make it hard." He turned on me with wounded fury. "Easy for you to say. You get everything." I shook my head. "I never asked for any of this." Richard placed the folded letter back into its envelope. "She wrote these words for both of you. Her love was different, but it was real." David rose, suddenly pacing the room. His hands ran through his hair. "This is twisted. She gave my life to him." "She gave your life back to you," Richard said gently, "without crutches." David stopped at the window, staring at the street below. His shoulders rose and fell, the tension of years crumbling. Then he whispered, "I do not know who I am without her shadow." "Neither did I admitted. "Until now." He spun, eyes blazing again. "Do not pretend this is noble. You are a power plant worker, a man who fixed wires. You cannot run a corporation." "Maybe not," I said. "But she trusted me." The silence that followed was jagged. Richard cleared his throat. "There is more to discuss. The company will not wait. But for now, you have both heard her words." David slumped back into his chair, exhausted. His face was pale, his lips pressed thin. The battle in him was far from over. I folded my hands in my lap, the letter heavy in my pocket. Angela's voice still echoed, telling me I was worthy, telling David he was not ready. It was a strange kind of mercy, one that cut and healed at the same time. The letter lay folded on the desk, but its weight had not left the room. Richard gathered the documents with steady hands. His tone shifted back to business. "There are additional matters regarding the estate that require immediate attention." David groaned. What more could there be? He rubbed his forehead, drained and bitter. Richard clasped his fingers. "Williams Consulting Solutions is not only an inheritance. It is a living structure with contracts, employees, and obligations. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting this morning. They expect to see both of you." David barked a laugh without humor. "The board wants me." "Not him." Richard looked directly at me. Angela was clear. "Mr. Johnson now holds controlling interest. The board will recognize his authority, though they may resist it." My chest tightened. Controlling interest. The word still felt foreign, like a costume too large to wear. David leaned across the desk. "You cannot be serious. He is a retired line worker. He knows nothing of corporate law, nothing of mergers or markets." Richard did not blink. "Your mother anticipated these concerns. She attached conditions to this transfer." "Conditions," David repeated, his voice sharp again. "Yes," Richard said. "Marcus Johnson must present to the board within 30 days a comprehensive plan for community engagement and ethical responsibility. Failure to do so will suspend his voting rights until compliance is achieved." 30 days. The phrase echoed like a countdown. David smirked. "There it is. She left you a throne made of paper. You will fail before the ink dries." I sat still, letting the words settle. 30 days to prove I could carry a company I had never even entered. 30 days to honor the trust Angela had placed in me. Richard continued. "In the meantime, the company's daily operations remain with the executive team. They will expect stability, not disruption." David straightened, seizing the chance. "The executives know me. I have worked with them for years. They will not follow him." Perhaps Richard allowed, but legally, they must respect his position. David pointed a finger at me. "You hear that? 30 days. You will drown in less than 10. His contempt burned, but beneath it I heard fear. For all his certainty, he knew the company could slip beyond his control. Richard closed the folder. I will escort you both to headquarters tomorrow morning. The board has called a special session. You will address them then. Tomorrow. My voice was barely above a whisper. Yes, Richard said. The sooner you establish presence, the better. David shoved back his chair and began pacing. This is absurd. They cannot expect him to lead. I have devoted my life to this company. I watched my son, his polished shoes clicking against the wood floor, his shoulders tense. For years I had seen him as untouchable, molded by his mother into a mirror of her ambition. Now cracks showed. He was furious, yes, but also terrified. Richard rose, signaling the session's end. Gentlemen, grief and anger are natural, but the company cannot wait. We will reconvene tomorrow. David stormed toward the door. Enjoy your throne, old man. It will collapse before you can sit in it. The door slammed. Silence returned. Richard placed a hand on my shoulder. Marcus, she believed you could do this. Trust her. Trust yourself. I nodded though doubt clawed at me. 30 days. 1 month to prove I was more than a symbol. That night, sleep evaded me. I sat at my kitchen table with Angela's letter spread before me. Her handwriting curved across the page, urging me to believe. I thought of the men and women who worked at the company, people whose names I did not know, but whose lives depended on paychecks. I thought of David, consumed by resentment, and wondered if Angela had given me this burden, to save him as much as to honor me. Morning came gray. My suit felt heavy as armor as I drove to the headquarters. The building rose from the city, like glass and steel ambition. I parked between luxury cars that gleamed with status. My old Honda looked like a relic, yet it carried me inside. The lobby smelled of polished marble and money. Receptionists in tailored black greeted David with familiarity. They looked at me with polite confusion. He belongs here, their eyes seemed to say. You do not. Richard met us and guided us to the elevator. The ride up was silent, except for the soft hum of machinery. My reflection in the steel doors showed a man uncertain, but unwilling to retreat. When the doors opened, a boardroom stretched before us, long table gleaming under recessed lights. Suits filled the chairs, faces lined with curiosity and doubt. Richard spoke firmly. Members of the board as counsel for the estate. I present Marcus Johnson, controlling shareholder and appointed chairman. A murmur rippled through the room. Eyes scanned me like scanners searching for flaws. David slid into a seat near the head of the table, confidence returning in the arena he knew best. He whispered to a woman beside him, drawing a nod. I remained standing. My knees trembled, but I planted my feet. Angela's words echoed, "You will use it for others." I cleared my throat. Ladies and gentlemen, I am not a businessman. You know that. What I am is someone who understands responsibility. I kept the power running in this city for decades. Now I have been asked to keep another kind of power alive. I will honor that. The room stilled. Some eyes narrowed, others softened. The battle had begun. The boardroom emptied slowly after the session. Voices lingered in the hall, whispers about competence, about risk, about legacy. I remained at the long table, my palms pressed against the polished surface, trying to steady my breath. The suits had listened, some doubtful, some curious, but no decision had been made. 30 days. The clock had started. David stayed behind. He closed the door with deliberate force, cutting off the hum of voices outside. His eyes locked on mine. You embarrassed yourself in there. I straightened. I spoke the truth. Truth does not run companies, he snapped. Strategy does. Numbers do. And you have neither. I held his gaze. Then teach me. He blinked startled, then barked a laugh. You want me to teach you? The man who ruined my mother's marriage now wants me as his tutor. I let the words land. They carried years of resentment, heavy and sharp. Yet I did not flinch. Angela gave me this responsibility, but she also gave me you. His face hardened. She gave you everything. She gave me scraps. I stepped closer. She gave you freedom, David. Freedom to build something without her shadow, without mine. Freedom, he spat. You call a house and 500,000 freedom. It is exile. It is a chance, I said softly. He slammed his fist against the table. Stop pretending this is noble. She humiliated me. She humiliated us both. No, she trusted us differently. His jaw clenched. He paced the room, shoulders tight like a caged animal. You cannot survive this, Dad. The board will devour you. Then help me, I said. Not for me, for the people who depend on this company. He stopped pacing. His eyes narrowed. You are asking me to stand beside you. Yes. Why should I? Because you still carry her fire, I said, and I carry her regret. Together we might make something better. He shook his head violently. You think one sentimental speech changes years of betrayal? No, I admitted, but it could change tomorrow. Silence stretched between us. Outside the glass wall, the city shimmered in the afternoon light. For a moment, I thought I saw a crack in his armor. Then he spoke low and bitter. I will never work for you. Not for me, I said gently. For the workers who need paychecks. For the clients who trust this firm. For the children your mother dreamed of helping. His mouth tightened. You think appealing to charity will sway me? I am not a child. Then prove it, I said. Take charge of the community foundation. Run it. Show the board you can lead with purpose. He laughed without humor. A charity project. That is what you offer me. It is not small, I replied. It is real money, real people, real responsibility. You could make it thrive. You could prove your mother wrong. He stared at me, breathing hard. For a second I thought he might accept. Then his eyes flared again. You want to trap me with scraps while you sit on the throne. It is not a throne, I said quietly. It is a burden, one I never asked for. He shook his head. No. You want to parade me as your redemption. I will not play along. His refusal stung, but I held steady. Then walk away, David. But remember this. Your mother believed in your brilliance, but she feared your arrogance. Prove her wrong. His lips trembled. He turned toward the door. You will fail, old man, and when you do, I will be waiting. He left the door slamming behind him. The room echoed with the sound, a reminder of how far apart we still were. I sank into the chair he had abandoned. Angela's words returned, urging me not to waste what she had given. But how could I carry this alone? The city stretched beyond the window, indifferent to my turmoil. I thought of the workers filing into offices, the families relying on paychecks, the clients waiting for guidance. Their lives would not pause for my grief or David's anger. That night, back in my apartment, I spread the documents across the table. Budgets, contracts, obligations. Numbers blurred, but I forced myself to keep reading. Angela had believed I could do this. I would not let her down. Near midnight, the phone rang. I hoped it was David, some sign of softening. But it was Richard. His voice was firm. The board has called another session in 1 week. They want to hear your plan. 1 week, I repeated. Yes, you must show them direction. Even a sketch will matter. I closed my eyes. Angela had given me 30 days. The board had cut it to 7. When I hung up, the apartment was silent again. I stared at Angela's letter on the table. Her handwriting glowed in the lamplight. You will use it for others. I whispered into the emptiness. I will try. The week passed like a storm. Days filled with documents, late nights filled with numbers I barely understood. I scribbled notes, circled words, reread contracts until my eyes blurred. Angela's letter stayed beside me on the table, a compass I reached for whenever fear closed in. When the morning of the board meeting arrived, my suit felt heavier than armor. I drove to headquarters under a sky the color of steel. The glass tower loomed above me, reflecting clouds that threatened rain. Inside the lobby bustled with employees who barely glanced at me. To them, I was still a stranger wearing a borrowed title. Richard met me by the elevator. He studied my face. Are you ready? No, I admitted. But I am here. That is enough, he said. The elevator doors opened onto the boardroom floor. The same long table, the same polished wood, but this time the chairs were filled. 12 members waited, eyes sharp. David sat near the end, shoulders squared, lips curled in a faint smile. Richard spoke first. Ladies and gentlemen, as counsel for the estate, I present Marcus Johnson, controlling shareholder and chairman. He is here to outline his vision for the next 30 days. I rose, hands trembling slightly, but my voice found steadiness. Thank you. I know what you see when you look at me. Not a banker, not a consultant, not a strategist. You see a retired line worker who spent decades keeping power flowing in this city. That is true. I am not what you expect. But I am here because Angela trusted me to lead with character. Murmurs stirred around the table. I pressed forward. I cannot outtalk you on markets. I cannot outguess you on profits. But I can promise you this. For 30 years, I kept lights on during blizzards and heat waves. I showed up at 2 a.m. when transformers blew. I knew that failure meant families sitting in the dark. That sense of responsibility is what I bring here. Some members leaned back skeptical. Others nodded faintly. I continued. Angela built an empire. She built wealth, clients, power. But she also wrote that she wanted more service, community ethics. I will not dismantle what she built. I will strengthen it with purpose. David's voice cut across the room. Fine words. But words do not make payroll. I met his stare. No, but integrity keeps payroll honest. A man at the far end adjusted his tie. What exactly do you propose, Mr. Johnson? I drew a breath. First, stability. No layoffs, no rash changes. Every employee keeps their role while we review operations. Second, transparency. I propose an independent ethics audit within 60 days. Third, service. We will launch the Angela Williams Community Foundation, funded with 2% of annual profits dedicated to education and housing. The room buzzed with reaction. Some skeptical, some surprised. David scoffed. A charity stunt. That will bleed resources. I shook my head. It will build trust. Clients do not just buy services, they buy values. If we show values, profits will follow. A woman with silver hair leaned forward. 2% is a bold start. Do you intend to manage this foundation yourself? No, I said. I want a younger leader, someone who can bridge ambition with compassion. My eyes flicked toward David. For a heartbeat, silence held. He shifted uncomfortably, then looked away. Richard spoke up. The board must decide whether to accept these initial proposals. They do not bind long-term strategy, but they set direction. The chairman pro tem cleared his throat. Mr. Johnson, you are untested, but your humility is disarming. I am willing to give this a trial. Several heads nodded. A few remained stern. David rose, fury simmering. You are making a mistake. He will fail. He cannot guide this company. One woman answered him. Perhaps, but he offers honesty. That has been missing. The vote was informal, but the outcome clear. A majority agreed to grant me 30 days to prove myself. Richard nodded. Then it is settled. As the meeting broke, I stood rooted, the weight of responsibility pressing heavier than ever. David brushed past me, his voice low and venomous. This is temporary. When you stumble, I will be there to take what is mine. I did not stop him. I only whispered, then be ready to lead with more than anger. He paused for the briefest second, then walked on. When the room was empty, I sank into a chair. My hands trembled not from fear alone, but from the magnitude of what had just begun. The board had not crowned me. They had tested me, and the real test was still ahead. Richard placed a hand on my shoulder. She would have been proud. I looked down at Angela's letter in my pocket. Her words echoed. Do not waste it. Live in a way that honors us. I whispered to her memory. I will. The city skyline glittered beyond the glass. For the first time in years, I felt both fear and purpose. The boardroom emptied, but the sound of voices lingered in my ears long after the doors closed. The vote had been a reprieve, nothing more. 30 days. I had been handed a countdown, and every tick of the clock pressed against my chest like a weight. I walked out into the evening light with Richard by my side. The glass tower reflected the last rays of the sun, golden but cold. My old Honda waited at the curb, out of place among black sedans and gleaming SUVs. Richard placed his hand on my shoulder. Marcus, she trusted you. Do not forget that. I nodded, but doubt gnawed at me. Trust was one thing. Results were another. That night, I spread the company reports across my kitchen table. Angela's handwriting on the letter lay above the columns of numbers, as if her voice were hovering over every page. I traced her words with my finger. You will use it for others. But how? How could a man who had spent his life climbing utility poles and repairing transformers guide a corporation that spanned continents? My training had been wire circuits voltage, not profit margins and mergers. Near midnight, I brewed coffee and read again. Contracts, balance sheets, forecasts. My eyes blurred, but I kept going. Somewhere in those pages was a truth Angela had believed I could see. The next morning, I returned to headquarters. The lobby felt less hostile this time, though curious glances still followed me. An assistant escorted me to a smaller conference room where department heads waited. Faces lined with fatigue and guarded patience turned toward me. I cleared my throat. I know I am not who you expected. I will not pretend to understand every detail of your work, but I understand responsibility. For decades, failure in my job meant darkness for families. Failure here would mean something just as dire. I ask for your help. The room shifted, shoulders eased. Not everyone, but enough. They began to speak cautious at first, then more openly. Problems with contracts, tension with suppliers, employee morale slipping. I listened, pen scratching notes. Listening was a language I knew well. When the meeting ended, a woman from accounting lingered. My name is Denise, she said. I have been here 20 years. I want you to know people want this company to stand for more than numbers. If you can make that real, you will not be alone. Her words warmed something inside me. For the first time since the will was read, I believed I might not drown. But David was waiting. He cornered me in the hallway, his voice low and sharp. Do not think a few friendly words mean you belong. They will turn on you as soon as profits dip. I looked at him. Then help me keep them strong. He sneered. You still do not understand. I will not serve under you. Not under me, I said. Beside me. In the foundation. He shook his head. I told you before, I am not your redemption. Then prove it another way, I said quietly. Show the board you can lead with vision, not just anger. He stepped closer, his breath hot. I will show them, by tearing you down. He walked away, leaving me in the echo of his words. The days raced by. I met with teams, reviewed projects, walked the floors of the building. I asked questions more than I gave orders. And slowly, people responded. They were surprised I remembered names, that I asked about families, that I stayed late to hear concerns. Perhaps Angela had known this, that leadership was not only numbers, but presence. Still, every night I felt the weight of the company pressing harder. Angela's letter steadied me, but the fear never left. On the 28th day, the board convened again. The room was tense, filled with expectation. I stood before them with a folder in my hands. I began. 30 days ago, you questioned whether I could survive here. I questioned it too. But I have listened. I have walked your halls, spoken with your people, read your contracts. What I found is not just a company, it is a community, and communities do not survive on profit alone. I outlined the plan. Stability, transparency, the community foundation with an independent board of its own. Investment not only in clients but in neighborhoods, schools, housing. I spoke plainly without jargon, the only way I knew. When I finished, silence held. Then one board member, a man with gray hair and a skeptical face, spoke. You are not a businessman, Mr. Johnson, but perhaps that is why you see what we do not. Others murmured agreement. The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. They granted me the authority to proceed. Relief washed over me, but also fear. This was only the beginning. After the meeting, I stepped into the hallway. David stood there, arms crossed. His eyes met mine, full of storm. Congratulations, he said flatly. You convinced them. I did not gloat. I only said, it was never about convincing. It was about remembering who we serve. He shook his head. You still believe character matters more than power? Yes, I said simply. For a moment something flickered in his face, doubt, pain, maybe longing. Then it hardened again. This is not finished. He walked away, but slower this time, as if the fight inside him was not so certain. That evening I left the building with Angela's letter in my pocket. The sun dipped low, casting the city in gold. The future loomed uncertain, but purpose burned brighter than fear. I whispered to the woman who could no longer hear me. I will not waste what you left. The wind carried the words away, but they settled in my heart. True legacy is never measured in wealth alone. It is measured in the choices we make when no one watches, is in the burdens we carry for others, and in the love we refuse to bury. Money fades, but character and dignity endure longer than any empire ever built.